A claim often made, and one that is at least probably somewhat true, is that liberalism is responsible for the economic growth experienced by the countries most steeped in it since its inception. To simplify the argument enormously, once individuals are left alone to self-sort the economy, the invisible hand will guide the distribution of resources such that, in accordance with the maximizing of individual utility, consumers will economically reward more utility-generating, value-adding, and most productive producers, improving all three of these across the economy. If it were to be suggested that this process could be improved, then many a memory of the same sort of Marx-inspired argument will be conjured, or perhaps even more generally the retort of, "at what expense?" might be readied. But there is another possibility much less frequently discussed. This takes the form of the liberal paradox, as discovered by Amartya Sen in 1970. But first a couple of definitions. To start off with, in this context, by utility we mean the satisfaction of consumer preferences, with greater utility representing more satisfaction. Pareto efficiency, meanwhile, is the attainment of a consumption level which cannot grant more utility to one or more parties without depriving another. Therefore, a Pareto inferior position would be one that allows greater utility for one or more parties without depriving another. Finally, nosy preferences are those which claim utility based on the consumption of others. Combining these concepts yields the issue that when more than two options for consumption are present, with heterogeneous nosy preferences, Pareto efficiency cannot be maintained while holding to the principle of non-intervention with regards to the preferences of individuals. An example of this may play out in the following way. In a slight reframing of the original example proposed by Sen, two parties exist, libertine and moralist. Both must determine the distribution of recreational drugs, and order their preferences for whether they should be used at all, used only by those of good character, or banned altogether. Moralist believes that the drugs will have a detrimental effect on their society if introduced at all, and would most prefer that they be kept out altogether, but if they must be allowed, they should be kept away from libertine, who is much more likely to develop an addiction to them. Libertine, meanwhile, thinks it abhorrent that the drugs be arbitrarily gated from use, and would like to use them. But even more than that, libertine thinks that moralist really needs to loosen up a bit, and the drugs would do just the trick, maybe even bring moralist around to their way of thinking. In this case, then, the neutral governor of the situation is presented with two options. Either they remain committed to the idea of liberalism, wherein anyone can consume the drugs if they wish to, or they force moralists to consume the drugs, being that it is the outcome preferred to free availability by both parties, and thus Pareto superior. According to this, the liberal paradox, and being that we are a social species with regards to decisions of our neighbours, we must make a choice, either for utility maximization, and thus greater prosperity through Pareto efficient distribution and consumption patterns, or liberalism with regards to non-coercion.